And this is Changing the Narrative. I'm David Rives, and today on the podcast, we are having a conversation about astronomy, about the immensity of space, and so much more. I am joined by my friend, Doug Walker. That is Dr. Doug Walker, PhD in astronomy. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for enjoy being here.
It is great having you here. Last night, we had this, yesterday, we had this big astronomy day. Mm-hmm. You presented twice, I think? 2 talks,
yes, sir.
2 talks. We had workshops on different types of optics and telescopes. Mm-hmm. We had experiments in the rotunda here at the Wonder Center. And then our intention was to have a star party.
Right.
But you know, there's one thing that I've never been able to really do anything about, and that's the weather.
It's kind of tough to control it. Usually the Lord's in control of that one, right?
That's right. Doug, tell me just a little bit about yourself and when you got passionate about astronomy.
Okay. I've been passionate about spaceflight and astronomy since I was like 3 years old, you know. Yep. And so going back, we were trying to launch John Glenn into orbit way back in the early 60s before I ever started elementary school. And back then they would show the rocket sitting there on TV, you know, for like hours, right? And the news guys would talk about it, right? You know, and they'd go through all these delays and all that. And my mother said I would sit there in front of the TV and watch it all day. You know, so she knew I had some passion about it, right? So I've had a passion about it ever since I was young, you know.
That's so neat. Yeah. That's so neat. Now, did you ever dream of like being an astronaut, or were you more interested in the astronomy study part of things, or how did that progress?
I was more interested, I guess, that time in spaceflight, because that's when they were trying to get to the moon. They had the Mercury flights and the Gemini missions, and I used to watch all the Gemini missions and stuff like that. And when I graduated from college, I had coming out for a degree in mathematics and such. And NASA had an open announcement, apply for the astronaut shuttle program, right? Yeah. And so I applied for that, okay? And of course, you know, I didn't have the credentials or whatever to get into it, but they came back and said, hey, you know, we're not going to select you for an astronaut, but, you know, we're impressed with your grades and stuff, and we'd like you to apply for other operational support, you know, down here. So that's how I got on at the Johnson Space Center after college. So.
Wow. That's so neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Take us a little bit further down the road. When did you decide to pursue your PhD?
Okay. So, again, always loved astronomy. Yeah. I started in college, so I'll back up in high school. I was kind of like, you know, not a really good student or whatever. And I was trying to take extra courses to get out of high school early, taking a drama class, right?
Oh, okay.
And so I had a teacher that took a liking to me, and she comes over one day, Juanita McCullough. See, I still remember her name years later, right? She comes over to me, and she says, well, what are you going to major in college? I said, I'm not going to college, you know, because I'd mowed all these yards making money. I kind of had my own business, you know, making some money. And one of the yards I was mowing was a gal I knew in high school, and her father owned a construction company. He said, as soon as you graduate, come and see me. I'll give you a job, right? Okay. Right out of the bat, make you an apprentice and all this kind of stuff, right? And I said, well, I'm going to do that. And she looks at me, she goes, no, you're not. You're too smart for that. You're going to go to college. I'm going to bring you some college catalogs. We're going to figure out what you want to do, right? Turns around and walks off. And I'm like, well, who is this to try to tell me what I'm going to do in my life, right? But it got me thinking. It's like, well, yeah, maybe I should think about going to college, right? So that was a change of course, right? Yeah. You know, so I kind of like switching course and direction there. So she brought in some catalogs, and I'm like, I want to be an astronomer, right?
Okay,
you know, because always, you know, want to be an astronomer, right? And started off majoring in physics, undergraduate. Well, I didn't know how to study coming out of college. I mean, high school, you can just I could just like study for an exam in commercials while you're watching TV, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you get to college, it's like, it's a little bit different story, you know? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, first semester of college, I didn't fail out or whatever, but, you know, some of the grades weren't that great. And I kind of got discouraged, and I was like, maybe I'll just drop out and take a class or take a job over here at the airport. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport had just opened up, okay? So they were wanting people, baggage handlers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And my brother said, well, why don't you try business administration for a while? Don't drop out yet. And I'm like, okay, I'll try that. So I switched to business administration in the spring. And then I learned what it took to make good grades, right?
Yeah.
You know, study your head off and then study it off again, and like, okay, well, I can make A's. You know? And I took a business math course, and it had some business calculus in it. And I was like, this is kind of interesting. But it's funny because I didn't like mathematics in high school. Right? I thought, this is kind of interesting. So I grew up in a Christian home, but I didn't really become a true, Christian profession of faith until after my freshman year. And so all during that spring semester, I'm trying to figure out, well, okay, so what is it I want to do, right? And I like geology and minerals, so I was seriously looking at geology. I took architectural drafting in high school, so I was looking at, maybe I'm going to be an architect. Didn't think about mathematics, but I liked the business calculus. And then I became a Christian after right after the freshman year. And, excuse me. Right after my freshman year, they came out with a new program, mathematics and computer science option, and I take an introductory computer science course.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. So I switched to mathematics, graduated in mathematics, right? Then got the job in Houston with NASA. So.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's quite a progression.
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't just say, well, let's do a baggage handling job.
Yeah, but I didn't go that route, right?
There's nothing wrong with that, but you had a different calling.
Right. So then I went to work at NASA, and then from there, worked flight operations, first shuttle flights, helped train the first shuttle flight crew. John Young, who walked on the moon, Apollo 16, and I'd seen on some of the Gemini flights, he was on our first shuttle mission, him with Robert Crippen. And so that was fun, right?
Yes.
But it's the same thing, training all the time, right? So I'm going to do more researchy stuff. So I switched over and started working for mission planning and analysis called MPAT, Mathematical Physics Branch. So we're doing on-orbit navigation and stuff on the space shuttle. And the guy who ran the branch was Emil Schissinger, a German, right?
Uh-huh.
Been there since the early Mercury days. And it's funny because he was a little German guy, and he'd wear these shirts with a tie around his collar, and his neck was so small his head would just turn in the shirt. Right? And so I thought then, okay, I want to get, I got ended up with 2 master's degrees in University of Houston when I was at NASA. And I thought, well, I want to get my PhD. So I was going to go get my PhD in mathematics, And so University of Texas has a research lab there. So went there, started working on my PhD while I was working for this lab because, I'm trying to make money because at this time I've got a wife and dog and all sorts of stuff, right? And you take qualifying exams. So I failed the first qualifying exam. It's like, really? So I got on and talked to them, and they go like, yeah, no one in the history of the school's ever done this part-time like you're trying to do, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, now you're telling me, right? So ended up taking a job with Lockheed Martin out in Phoenix. Okay. We moved from Austin to Phoenix, and they were some highly classified programs, Yeah. And I started working on those. And, still loved astronomy. I mean, Arizona's a great place for astronomy, right?
Yeah.
And but I'm not an astronomer, whatever, at this time. Uh-huh. And very distinctly, I was camping in Bryce Canyon National Park up in Utah.
That's a beautiful. Everybody, beautiful. I mean, that's one of my favorite national parks.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. Yeah. So they had an astronomy talk by a guy at night. I thought, I'm going to go to that, right? So I went to this talk, and I was sitting there, and the Lord spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And he says, I created you with a purpose, and you are to be an astronomer.
Wow.
And I remember talking back to the Lord saying, okay, I'm 50 years old. Mm-hmm. I have no clue how to do this, but whatever door you open, I will walk to that door. So, and then I found out later, I found this little group that meets in Los Angeles every year, and I'm still part of it. It's like an amateur professional group of astronomers. Mm-hmm. Went over there, met some guys that were doing some work, and they were like, oh, we need somebody to analyze data and stuff. Well, that's what I did with my, in work, analyze, statistics and data. Started working with them. A few years later, this is now around 2010 or so, they were just starting to come out with courses, online courses. And so I got a master's of astronomy from a little college in Australia, James Cook University. James Cook was the guy who went around, discovering.
Absolutely.
So it's named after him, right?
Yeah.
And I started there because they had a PhD program that you could go into remotely after the master's. Well, then they moved that program from that university. And so I was like, I may never get a degree in astronomy. I thought, maybe I'll just do that. And, my financial planner was saying, you're in a place you could really retire if you wanted to, right? Even though I'm not 65, he says, you can retire, right? Because Lockheed had a pension.
Okay.
And I'm like, I don't know. You're all nervous, because you got this fat paycheck and stuff.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'll look around to see if I can't find a PhD program in astronomy. And I looked in Australia. And I love fly fishing, and it's great fly fishing in New Zealand, right? So I thought, well, maybe I'll look at New Zealand, So there's the University of Canterbury, New Zealand. And they had a program for a project, photometry of globular clusters.
Ooh,
right?
Okay.
Like, that would be really cool.
That is.
And using the South African Large Telescope, which is a 10-meter telescope, right? I'm like, that'd be cool, right? So I sent him a resume, right? Email resume, didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, they're not going to want someone like my age, right? Emailed him a few days later and said, I know you're busy, but I was wondering if, you might have an entry. He goes, he emails back and says, I think you're perfect for this project. When can you start, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I'm like,
how about that?
And so then I talked myself out of it. I'm like, I don't know, I mean, if I get a scholarship, then I'll go, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I apply for scholarships. And so they gave me a university scholarship. Like, they give out 5 a year to give me one, right? And I'm like, okay, this is the gift from the Lord, right?
This is a sign.
This is a sign. This is the absolute sign gift from the Lord, right? Like, okay, I'm going, right?
Okay.
And so I tell my boss at work, I was like, I'm leaving. This is like in September, October 2012, yeah.
Okay.
And I said, I'm leaving in 6 months in the spring, right?
Yeah.
He's like, you shouldn't do this. I'm like, I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I had a countdown calendar of weeks on my whiteboard, 13X or 12X. People are like, what's that number for? I'm like, I'm just keeping track of stuff. And so then Lockheed started like a downsizing process, which they do every once in a while, right? Got too many people, senior level people, we're going to like downsize. So they offered an early out package about the time I was going to leave, right? So I'm like, well, I'll take one of those, right? Yeah. So that was like another 40 or 50 grand in my pocket, to leave.
Yeah. So,
get on a plane, fly down there to, Christchurch, New Zealand, right? So I'm working harder down there than I did at Lockheed because I'm,
Yes.
we get photometry of this globular cluster, and I'm analyzing all the data and stuff. So I ended up discovering 97 new variables in the Omega Centauri cluster, which is the largest globular cluster in our Milky Way.
Omega Centauri.
Omega Centauri, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that, how close is that to Alpha Centauri? Is it in the same constellation?
So the star Alpha Centauri?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
You don't know? Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to go check it out.
But a globular cluster is basically a cluster of stars that are sort of gravitationally locked together.
Bound together.
And so it forms this basically, it looks like a glob. It looks like a sphere of stars all together. And the Great Hercules cluster would be an example of a globular cluster.
In the northern hemisphere.
In the northern hemisphere. But Omega Centauri in the southern hemisphere, and you are studying this and learning from it.
Right.
Okay.
So we're getting data from the South African telescope.
Yeah.
When I first went down there, I told my professor, like, we get to go to South Africa? He's like, no, Doug, we're just going to get the data and bring it over, so don't get excited. And then my associate professor, Gisby Bono, Professor Gisby Bono from the University of Rome, he goes, I've got this data we've taken on our European telescope, an 8-meter telescope of Omega Centauri. So, you can have that data analyzed, right? So he has had a set of data of about 6 days in a row, constantly observing the cluster. Yeah. The South African SALT telescope, I'd only get slices of time, like a few hours every day, right? And so that data was pretty ragged. Okay. All the discoveries I made was using the 8-meter telescope. And I could actually, I'd plot the data. You could see the curves, the data and stuff. And
So let's talk about this for everyone listening for a second, because you've got these massive telescopes stationed all over the world, but at the same time, there's only so many telescopes of these really, really large telescopes around the world. Right. So you have to basically book time on these telescopes to do that research, and you've got thousands and thousands of other people also trying to look to book some time.
Right.
So it's extremely valuable to get time on these big telescopes, and when you do, if you're careful about it and strategic about it, then you get data that could lead to brand new discoveries and allowing us more information about astronomy.
Right.
Now, when it comes to astronomy, I've said since 2007, the heavens declare the glory of God. Psalm 19:1 seems obvious. What was your progression there? Have you always been have you been a Christian from an early age?
Yeah, Christian from my freshman year.
Okay.
But I wasn't always a creation Christian, right?
Okay.
I read Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box some years back, right? So that put to rest the evolutionary of humans, like, okay, that's ridiculous, right? God created us, right? But the rest of the universe, it was like, well, Big Bang and all that. I didn't really think too much about it, It's like, well, who am I to tell God how to create his universe, right? And when I was in New Zealand, on TBN down there, they had your program, Creation of the 21st Century, right? And I started watching that.
Wow.
The first time I saw your program down there.
Wow.
And I was like, let me think about this. And I'd watch several of them and I'd be thinking, maybe I need to take a closer look at Genesis, right? So I go back and read Genesis. Like, you know what? I need to make a decision, right? Yeah. Either all the scriptures are absolutely true, right? And if they are, I need to believe what they say, not try to twist them around to like, well, yeah, but there's millions of years. Right. Each day is a million years. No, that's not what it says, right? And just believe it, right? Because, as a mathematics major, it's, logic, and you get to the right answer. There's not like several right answers. There's like one right
There's
answer.
only one right answer.
There's only one right answer, right? So that converted me to like, no, I believe now the scriptures, right? Okay, yep, God created the whole universe and what he said 6,000 years ago or whatever, right? Yeah. And so that really shifted me over to being a creation astronomer, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible. We just got back from South Africa. Right. I lead tours over there. You were able to bring a small telescope.
Had a small telescope with me.
And point out some of these different features to the group over there. And you did a presentation about astronomy. But there are these little segments within astronomy that people have a lot of questions about. One of those things is stellar formation. And I would love if you would talk about stellar formation for a second.
Okay.
Because a lot of people you'll see in the news that this rich area of space, that is birthing new stars, young stars. Right. And then they point to something, right? And we don't know how to take that. We don't know, well, how do you know this? And what are the assumptions involved? Can you just talk about stellar formation and star birthing zones for a moment?
Yes, you're correct. They've got, Hubble Space Telescope's been in space for 20-something years. Now they have the James Webb telescopes up there a couple years, right? So they look at these areas, and one is like the nebular cloud in Orion, Great Nebula in Orion, right? And it's called Messier Object 42. So you looked at these gaseous regions and say, oh, that must be star, forming regions, because obviously we know that these gas clouds, they come together and they get so much compression and eventually they form the star and the solar system forms around that. It's all straightforward, right? Yeah. And you start looking into it, it's like, no, it's not straightforward, right? There's all these holes in it, right? So, and one of the talks, I was giving here just yesterday had a photo there from NASA and the European Space Agencies, all these different regions in the Great Nebula in Orion, saying these are star, planetary, regions that everything. And I said, well, I can look at that and say, to me, it looks like there's a gas cloud there, right? But it's like, It looks like there's stars in the gas cloud. I don't see any formation going on. Right? And so I'm an observational astronomer, and so I'm like, show me where it's actually occurring. If you show me where it's occurring, I'm like, okay, right? I don't have any objection to that, but show me, right? They can't show you.
Yeah.
And so you start looking in detail at these theories, and they start falling apart, right?
Yeah.
Because they start contradicting chemical laws, and everybody's learned, if anybody's taken, basic chemistry.
Yeah. Chemical
laws, physical laws and stuff. And you just can't get a gas cloud to compress down in a certain point. It starts repelling, So
Sure.
you can't get it down to where nuclear fusion actually begins.
So in the vacuum of space, typically, when we observe clouds of gas, normally we see them slowly expanding.
Not contracting.
Not contracting. And somehow to get these stars, and of course there are a lot of different theories and methods involved, but somehow to get these stars, a lot of these theories involve trying to compress the gas into a big ball of gas that we would call a star, right?
Right.
Well, if typically you see these things expanding, and typically we do see gas clouds expanding, that means that the gas is getting farther apart, and therefore it's going to be less obscure in the middle of those gas clouds or behind the gas clouds,
and if we're hiding a star to begin with.
Correct. It's almost like driving up a mountainous road in a dense fog, right? And all you can see is a few feet in front of you, and the rest is just foggy, right? So that's the nebula. That's the Latin for cloud. That's the cloud. And then as the clouds dissipate, all of a sudden you can see farther out, and you see another peak, another mountain that just appeared when the clouds started to dissipate. And so you immediately think to yourself, wow, well, a new mountain was just birthed, right? Somehow the clouds must have compressed and formed this new No, of course not. Somehow the clouds dissipated and a new mountain was revealed
behind the cloud. Right, exactly.
And that makes a lot of sense. That would be observational, and that's what we many times observe is in the middle of these clouds as they're dissipating, we see these little stars. That's not to say that the Bible says stars don't form.
Right.
There's no way to know for certain, but what we do know is that God created a universe full of stars, full of galaxies, fully formed in the beginning.
Right. Pretty incredible.
It is incredible to think that the Lord gave us the instructions. He gave us the history of the universe. From the very beginning, he wrote it down for us so that we could have confidence. And then when we observe things today, and I love that you say I'm an observational astronomer, because when we observe what's out there, we observe patterns, and we observe complexity, and we observe great beauty, and we observe things that we would associate with design. But design implies a designer, doesn't it?
Right.
If you had just a moment to go through a couple of things that seem to be pointing to evidence for a young solar system, what would it be?
Let's see, young solar system. So my favorite one is comets.
Okay.
Coming around, the sun, right?
Yeah.
And if the solar system is 4.5 billion years old, you wouldn't see any comets, because a comet basically is this big ball of ice and material and dust and stuff. So every time it comes around the sun, part of it burns off, and that's what makes the long tail.
Okay.
So after, multiple revolutions around the sun, you're burned away, right?
Yeah.
So, we shouldn't see any comets if the solar system is 4.5 billion years old. But we do.
Okay.
Now, secular astronomers get around this like, well, yeah, but, they come up with this rescue mechanism. It's like, there's this Oort cloud around the outer part of the solar systems where all these comets are. And, every once in a while, a rogue star or something disturbs one of them, and it puts it on a path around the sun, right? Yeah. Like, okay.
It's like a junkyard full of comets.
A junkyard full of...
occasionally, one of the comets gets diverted and goes flying into our...
And that's why we see, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm not arguing against there couldn't be a cloud out there.
Yeah.
Where's the evidence?
Yes.
Now,
if you're An observational
astronomer. I want to see some observational evidence. Of course, they say, well, our telescope systems are not powerful enough at this time to see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if someday they show me, yeah, here's snowy objects in the Oort cloud, I'll be like, oh, okay.
That's great.
That was a good theory. Now it's being proven, right? But until then, I'm like, it's just a theory, right?
Right.
Don't state it as a fact.
Yes.
It's a theory.
Don't state it as a fact. State it as a theory, and we start working on those models, and we say, how can we prove these things? How can we observationally show these things are correct? That's the problem with a lot of astronomy, is because you can't really get out there.
Right.
And space travel is so incredibly expensive and hard. All we can do is look through telescopes, make observations, make calculations, use mathematics to try to look at the physics of it all. And that's exciting, and it's a huge field, and it will allow us to learn so much more about what God has created. But we have to remember that we don't see these 14 billion years of stellar evolution. We can't, there's no way to observe it. There's no way to scientifically demonstrate it. And so we have to stand on the foundation of God's word, an historical record that told us how the universe was created. And that's exciting. And it means that we can trust it. Dr. Douglas Walker, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for the time and effort that you've put in, and for your faithfulness of following the Lord's calling and doing this, and for being here today, for being here yesterday to share with us the glory of God's creation. And I hope you'll come back in the future.
I will. It's been my honor to be here and share this with you. And I would look forward to another visit. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Changing the Narrative. I will see you next week. Until then, I'm David Rives, and I want you to keep looking up, because truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Find us on all social platforms to stay informed. Watch Genesis Science Network 24/7 for free on Roku, Fire TV, and on our website. Visit the world's largest origins-based store, creationsuperstore.com. Plan your trip to the Wonders Center and Science Museum just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Donate to our nonprofit ministry to help us continue sharing truth.